Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. As you can see, I got a new t shirt. I was at the Edinburgh UFO Festival, and a woman walked past my table wearing a shirt like this, and I thought, oh, that's kind of cool. I need to get one. I asked her where she got it. She told me, and I promptly forgot the name of the site. So I had to wait until I saw it advertised and got one. I would also like to recommend Josh Turner's latest two books that he just wrote. These are not your typical Bigfoot stories. This is not the kind of thing you want to read before you're going to go camping or walking in the woods. Very good stories that he's collected over the years. Just not the kind of thing you want to read out while camping. The Organic Man coffee trike is waiting for you. Okay, they're probably not waiting just for you in particular, but they're ready to serve the best coffee on the planet. If you'll just stop by and hand them a little money, they will hand you the best coffee in the universe between 6:30 a.m. and 7 p.m. except Sundays. Just like Chick-fil-A, they're closed. 4501 McPherson here in Laredo, or organicmancoffeetrike.shop if you're thinking that the drive is just a little too long. I received an email from Vic Hermosan. He told me about a podcast called The Paranormal Rundown and asked if I would consider being a guest on the show. I said yes, and then I went to their link and I listened to their first show. They talked about a bunch of different subjects that they would randomly pick out of a hat. Somebody would say, "Have you ever heard of?" And then they'd go into the subject. Well, one of the things that they were going to talk about was the hairy hand. Uh, Most of the folks didn't know about the hairy hand. One of them did say that it was from Dartmoor, England, but I guess they didn't know about the other types of hairy hands that were to be found around the planet. So my overactive curiosity gland kicked in and I started doing some digging, and the next thing you know, I had a show being prepared. Mano means hand, and Peluda is hairy. In Dartmoor, the hairy hand is linked to several car crashes. In the United States, well, in the Americas, I should say, the Mano Peluda is something more like the boogeyman. One, people encounter while traveling through a particular area in Dartmoor, and the other one you can find just about anywhere on this side of the planet, usually hiding under your bed. In Dartmoor National Park, it sits right in the middle of Devon. It's about as far southwest as you can get in England without being wet. I don't know if it's just the images I could find, but the place looks mystical. It really looks like something out of a fairy story. If a paranormal entity was looking for a home, this would be the place. The moors, the foggy tors, and the ancient woodland have long been the inspiration for countless legends and folklore. Moorland, or moors, is a type of habitat found in upland areas in temperate grassland, savannas, shrublands, mountain grasslands, and shrubland biomes, which is characterized by low-growing vegetation on acidic soil. A biome is a biogeographical unit consisting of a biological community that is formed in response to the physical environment in which they are found, and they share regional climates. Tors are land forms created by erosion and weathering of rock. most commonly made out of granite, schist, dacite, dolerite, ingramite, coarse sandstone, and other forms of rock. They look a lot like the mesas that we have here found out west, except they're not quite as big. If you saw the American Werewolf in London, you'll know the saying, stay off the moors. Dartmoor has a lot of legends ranging from witches, ghosts, bizarre occurrences, and fairies. One chilling and infamous tale to emerge from Dartmoor's expanses is that of the hairy hands. The legend tells of a malevolent pair of disembodied hands that force unsuspecting travelers off the road, causing accidents and striking fear in the hearts of those who dare to venture along any particular desolate stretch of road between Potts Bridge and I believe it's Two Bridges. The story of the hairy hands date back to the early 20th century. Over the years, there have been reports of accidents and unnerving encounters along the B 3212, a road that winds its way through the heart of Dartmoor. Victims of these incidents often report a sudden, inexplicable loss of control of their vehicles, which is accompanied by a terrifying sensation or the visual uh, a pair of large hairy hands that are gripping the steering wheel or the handlebars if they're on a motorcycle or bicycle. This pair of hands will force the car off the road, sometimes into a ditch, into a stone wall, into a hedge. A lot of times, folks have been killed by these incidents. In the early 1900s, a group of cyclists were traveling through the park on the B 3212. All of the cyclists suddenly had to fight their bikes to try staying on the road. They wound up in a ditch with minor injuries. All of them said it felt as if someone or something had grabbed the handlebars and turned them into the ditch. In around 1910, wagons being driven along the road would wind up running off into a field. The drivers were perplexed as their horses or ponies acted as if they were being guided by some unseen force. It didn't take long for the locals to begin to suspect there was something otherworldly going on. One one incident took place in 1921 when a doctor who worked at the Dartmoor prison had taken his two young daughters out on a motorcycle. Some accounts say the daughters were the children of the warden at the prison where he worked. Other accounts say that these were two neighbor children. The two girls, were stuffed into the sidecar of the motorcycle and they headed out onto the B 3212. As they rode along the desolate road, the doctor suddenly felt unseen force take control of his motorcycle, forcing him off the road and into a ditch. The doctor was killed in the crash, but the two girls survived. They both said they saw a pair of hairy hands grab the handlebars just before the crash. As locals began to rescue these two girls and recover the doctor, the hands were still seen holding on to the handlebars, grasping the doctor's hands and maintaining control of the cycle. The hands soon faded from sight. In the years that followed, more stories of the hairy hands began to circulate. A young army captain experienced a similar ordeal. He was found dead next to his motorcycle. The motorcycle looked as if it had been run over by a huge truck. There was no sign of anything having hit him. The accident was written off as being too much speed on a winding road. They couldn't explain why his motorcycle looked as if it had been run over by something and broken into so many small pieces. A terrified motorist said she actually saw a pair of hair covered hands reach from either side of her body, grab the steering wheel, and send her off the road. Her car wound up crashing through a hedge on the side of the road, causing damage to the vehicle, but she was able to walk away. What we call a travel trailer or an RV is called a caravan in Britain. A couple was camping out in Dartmoor Park. They had their trailer pulled off the road in a campsite. In the middle of the night, a sound awoke both campers. It sounded like something was scratching at the window. They both looked outside and saw a pair of disembodied hands covered in black hair scratching at the window. This was the end of their camping trip. The pair were no longer happy campers. My cat is trying to take control of the microphone. In 2008, a man had finished up his business in Port Postdam, Post Bridge, and set out driving back home. As he was traveling along the B-3212, he felt hands grab the steering wheel. Ah, she does that a lot now here lately. It's her latest trick. Okay, he's traveling along the B-3212 when he felt a pair of hands grab the steering wheel. The sensation was of hair-covered hands that were trying to force him off the road. These hands were on top of his, trying to turn the steering wheel. He was able to wrestle the wheel and stay on the road. As he was fighting the invisible entity, he could smell sulfur in the air. As the tales of the hairy hands grew more widespread, locals and visitors alike became increasingly fearful of traveling along this road. Some even resorted to carrying protective charms or praying for protection before embarking on their journey. The unsettling occurrences piqued the interest of paranormal investigators and folklorists who sought to uncover the truth behind the sinister phenomenon. One such encounter occurred in 1990 when a group of friends decided to explore the infamous road late at night. As they drove along the moonlit road, the driver suddenly felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The atmosphere inside the car became thick and oppressive, and the temperature suddenly dropped. Without warning, a pair of large, hairy hands appeared on the steering wheel, wrenching it violently from side to side. The terrified driver fought desperately to regain control of the car, narrowly avoiding the collision with an ancient oak tree right by the side of the road. This was a bit too much for the whole gang. Once the car was stopped and everybody was able to think straight, they got out of there, driving carefully out of the park. Various theories have been proposed to explain the hairy hands. Some believe that these hands belong to restless spirits bound to the area by some tragic or violent event from the past. Others speculate that the hands are the manifestation of malevolent energy, fueled by the countless souls who have met their untimely demise on Dartmoor's treacherous roads. Despite the passage of time, the legend of the hairy hands remains very much alive. To this day, travelers on the B-3212 continue to report unsettling experiences and near misses with other vehicles, trees, ditches, and with stone walls found along the area. The legend of the hairy hands has become an endearing part of Dartmoor's folklore. Some are fascinated, while others are terrified. There she is going after the mic again. Yeah, yeah. Maybe I can hold her. Anyway, it seems an inexplicable phenomenon has defied explanation, leaving those who have encountered it searching for answers and meaning. As with many legends, the truth behind the hairy hands may never be found. The authorities try to explain it away as being either people driving too fast on roads they're unfamiliar with, alcohol and driving, not paying attention to what people are doing, or all of the above. For those who choose to explore the enigmatic landscape of Dartmoor National Park, a healthy respect for its legends and lore is advised. The hairy hands may still be lurking, waiting for their next opportunity to strike, and leaving those who encounter them as just another statistic in the police's books. A search of history of Dartmoor brought up a possible connection to a past event. A blacksmith who was working in a gunpowder mill accidentally set off an explosion one day. Rescuers began digging through the rubble looking for his body. All they ever found were his hands. Could this be the cause of all of these encounters with disembodied hands? Others believe that the hairy hands are the manifestation from witchcraft. The area was a hotbed of activity over the centuries. Some believe the magic unleashed over the years accumulated and it formed into these hands. Hairy hands grabbing the steering wheel can't easily be avoided by not driving on the B3212. If you stay away from the place, well, the hands shouldn't be able to get you. What can you do about something that is found inside your home? The legend of La Mano Peluda can be found in almost every Latin American country, but it seems to be the biggest in Mexico and Colombia. It dates back to the time of the Spanish Inquisition. The Inquisition was created through a papal bull ad abominandum. Abominandum. I don't speak Latin. Issued in the end of the 12th century by Pope Lucius III in order to combat Albigensian heresy in southern France. Their original target was not witches, it was people that had other ideas about Christian faith. There were a large number of tribunals of the Papal Inquisition in various European kingdoms during the Middle Ages. At Turquemadi's urging, Ferdinand and Isabella issued an edict March 31st, 1492, bringing on the Spanish Inquisition. And no one expects the Spanish Inquisition. Some of y'all will get that. If you don't understand it, you need to go back and watch Monty Python's Flying Circus. And if you've never watched Monty Python's Flying Circus, you don't know what you're missing. Anyway, getting back to the story, the land seized from those executed became the property of the king and queen. The Spanish Inquisition was carried out in all Spanish territories. Many people believe it was more of a financial gain than for battling witchcraft and heresy. The story of La Mano Peluda is sort of a combination of a werewolf and the Candyman. Kids were told if they didn't behave right or they stayed up past their bedtime, the hairy hand, La Mano Peluda, would get them. Any kids trying to slip out of bed at night would find La Mano Peluda, was waiting under the bed. Now I have to ask, what if you had to go to the bathroom? Wet the bed or suffer the consequences of getting out of bed? Or would you be given like a pass based on the amount of liquid found inside your bladder? Uh, because you were doubled over in pain from having to go, would the hands allow you to get out of bed? Or were you just going to have to stay there regardless? Kids would be told that if they didn't go to sleep, Mano Peluda would grab them and make sure that they stayed put. But where did these hairy hands come from? The legend is that the hand was the only remaining part of a man who was killed during the Spanish Inquisition, and so he sought revenge by haunting Latino children, stealing them from their beds and taking them to some place that no one would ever find them. There are many legends that tell that under your bed there is a portal to the underworld, and this allows for more stories to grow. Now I have to wonder about the things kids develop as they move from the cradle to adulthood. The closet door thing has always fascinated me, but we didn't have a closet when I was growing up. All of our clothes went in the dresser. If they didn't go in the dresser, well, we didn't have them. I have no idea where I put my coat when I was little. I know I had one, but I don't remember ever stuffing it in the dresser. What is it about small rooms that can create an opening to another dimension? I interviewed a couple of young ladies that said that they have a portal in their closet. And this isn't when they were little, this is when they're both 18 and 19 years old. Then there's this thing under the bed. We used to let our dogs sleep in the bedroom, and so I didn't have any problem holding my hand or my foot off the edge of the bed. Every once in a while, something warm and wet would attach itself to me, but that was always just the dog's tongue. Uh, they don't sleep in the bedroom anymore. They kind of kept moving my wife's shoes around and eating them and things like that. Anyway, did y'all see the movie The Haunting of Hill House? The original, not The Haunting of Hell House or just Hell House. They made about 3 or 4 different versions of the same movie. When I was young, we saw The Haunting of Hill House. In it, one of these women, one of the actresses, they're staying in a room together, and she's scared in the middle of the night because it's dark and it's a creepy place. And so she asks the other woman if she would hold her hand at night. The next morning, she thanks her roommate for holding her hand, and her roommate says, I wasn't holding your hand. And of course, the question was, if it wasn't her, then who was it? Art Bell made talk radio into one of the most popular things in the country. He started out talking about UFOs and then branched out into all paranormal subjects. Others began to follow in his footsteps. Radio producers discovered that people were sick and tired of the same old sports and political discussions. People wanted to hear something far more entertaining and informative. The whole reason for Strange Things is here today was Arturo, who is now a U.S. citizen. He just got it the other week. He wanted a podcast that was kind of like Coast to Coast AM back when Art Bell was running things. I had no interest in doing a podcast, but Arturo kept enticing me to give it a try. When I started, I said I would probably do about 2 or 3 months worth of podcasts. Well, that was 7 years ago, and I still haven't run out of things to talk about. In Mexico, they had a radio show called La Mano Peluda with Juan Ramon Sainz. La Mano Peluda is a radio program that is broadcast from Mexico, but you can hear it anywhere in the world thanks to computer programming. You can find it on just about every podcast platform. It is in Spanish, but, well, a lot of people in the world speak Spanish. It is a radio show, it's not just a podcast. People call in live to tell their horror stories on the air. It is broadcast by Radio Formula. The program began August 13th, 1995, and it was created by Mario Cordova at station 104.1 FM. The first host was Ruben Garcia Castillo, who did the show for 4 years. From 1999 until 2010, Juan Ramon Saenz was the host. In 2002, Juan interviewed Josue Velasquez, who was a Satanist who told about how he'd entered to the dark side and he tried to reach Lucifer by murdering his grandmother. The show that is still being talked about today is called El Caso de Josue, or Josue's Case. Josue Velasquez called into the radio show from El Monte, California, and he told Juan Ramon, along with about 15 million listeners, about how he became a Satanist. Velasquez explains that as a child he crossed the border into the United States, apparently illegally, accompanied by his mother, his grandmother, and two brothers. Josue told Juan that when he was 16, he made a pact with a demon in exchange for money and economic power. But with every bit of money or power he gained, he experienced all kinds of nasty consequences. He would do horrible things in exchange for monetary gain, like every politician on the planet. Josue used his newfound powers to get more. He used them to get a career without ever bothering to finish school. He had a successful business in the U.S., but he didn't say what it involved. Although he was promised riches, these were riches that he couldn't always use to their full benefit. He said he could make $15,000 in one day, but he had to use it all up in the same day, or the money would simply disappear. He can't use the money to help his family. The reason he says he sold his soul in the first place. You know, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Josue said he was given the money with the intention of helping. The horrible things would happen to him. He would be attacked by demonic entities. One time, after trying to do the right thing with some of his money, a woman appeared and attacked him. She had long black hair, a knee-length black dress, and no legs. She just kind of hovered above the ground with no visible means of being there. She has stayed by his side ever since his first attempt at doing a good deed. She abuses him when he uses the money to help people. She brings him nothing but pain and suffering, and he can't get rid of this demon in a woman's body. During the phone call to Juan Ramon, Josue said she was right behind him, and he stopped the phone call to light a candle because she was beginning to bother him. He then said she was sitting in front of him. Noises can be heard in the background, and Josue sounds as if he's in pain. He continues telling Juan Ramon that the noises that could be heard didn't scare him all that much. Then he starts crying, saying that this thing is holding up a symbol in her hand. He's saying things like, please no, and stop. Josue said that the woman had a symbol like an inverted cross with an eyeball in the middle of it. He sounded like he was crying by this time. He said that he had been told years before that when he saw this symbol, he was going to die. Later, after the show, Juan Ramon said that the call felt like any other phone call, but as Josue got deeper into his story, The room began feeling unbearably cold. That's at the studio. During the part where Juan and the priest, who was on the show to give the other side of things, were reading a Bible, the pages they were reading from began curling up on its own, and a laptop in the studio suddenly exploded. 9 years after the call, Juan Ramon met with Josue and a team from TV Azteca in order to do a documentary about Josue and how he was doing. Josue insisted that the meeting had to occur on a lake, but he didn't say why. In the interview, Juan Ramon said for weeks after having Josue on the show, strange things kept happening in his home. He felt his bed would shake. He felt a wind blowing from behind his ear, but when he would turn, the wind would come from another direction. And this was inside his home. The demons, didn't like Juan trying to help Josue. During the interview, Juan felt a sudden pain in his stomach. I know the show didn't go into anything about hairy hands, but it was called La Mano Peluda. After the TV show aired, Juan Ramon passed away due to peritonitis, an infection of the area around the intestines. This illness can be treated using antibiotics, but for some unknown reason, they didn't do any good. The cameraman who went along to film the interview was hospitalized due to severe gallbladder problems. The host of the TV show, Extra Normal, who conducted the meeting between Josue and Juan, was in a very bad car accident. The priest, Roberto Gazzo, who was involved in some of the shows, died from heart complications. Many listeners believe that Juan Ramon died because Josue, who's still running around alive today, uh, did something to him. In 2012, a Mexican paranormal YouTuber tried to debunk this whole story between Josue. Many tried to say that Josue was just an amazing actor and that his story was nothing but a bunch of bunk. The coincidences that followed Juan and the priest dying and others becoming very ill make the idea of this all being faked just not all that believable. When the woman showed him that upside down cross with the eye on it, Josue was supposed to die. People have theorized that somehow Josue was able to trade the life of Juan and maybe the priest as well so that he would stay alive. As if this story wasn't eerie enough, there were many listeners who experienced strange, inexplicable events while listening to the show. One taxi driver, also named Josue, only Rodriguez, from Merida, Yucatan, was working his 6 p to 4 a shift while listening to the radio show. He picked up a woman and her mother. The woman was holding something in a blanket. The older woman asked to be taken to a church. As he was driving them to their destination, the thing in the blanket began twisting and turning. It let go with a horrifying yell. The taxi went out of control. The driver had to wrestle with the steering wheel in order to keep from crashing. The thing in the blanket turned out to be a 5-year-old girl, but the taxi driver said it didn't look or act like a little kid. The driver said that they should take this kid to the hospital, but the older woman said no, they needed a priest, not a doctor. As they drove to the church, the kid got more violent. With each scream, the taxi would shake and shudder. The old woman kept saying that this girl was possessed and they needed to get her to a priest. Roberto, another listener in 2002, said he began hearing disembodied voices for weeks after the episode had finished. Another listener named Mayella said that the volume of her radio would turn itself up on its own. Then the radio began changing stations and she began hearing strange noises afterwards. Another listener told about how all the things on his desk flew across the room right in the middle of the radio show. Later, he began feeling sick as if he had gotten food poisoning, but then nothing happened. It all just went away on its own. In 2021, Josue's cousin made a TikTok video. In it, he said that the 2002 radio show was absolutely real. He said that his cousin Josue was indeed an evil brujo who had sold his soul to the devil. Not a very good thing to have going on. Makes me wonder about some of the bizarre radio shows that I've listened to and some of the bizarre radio shows that I've done. In the times of Porfiriato, that's a hard one to say, Porfiriato, on the eve of the Mexican Revolution, various stories about life in different parts of the country began to be shared amongst all of the people. The Porfiriato, or in English, the Porfirio Diaz era, is a term given to the time when General Porfirio Diaz ruled Mexico as its president in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The phrase was coined by Mexican historian Daniel Caso Villegas. After seizing power in a coup in 1876, Diaz pursued a policy of his idea of order and progress, inviting foreign investors into Mexico and maintaining social and political order by force when needed. Those at the top should be allowed to stay at the top, while those at the bottom were not allowed to succeed at anything. There were sufficient economic, technological, social, and cultural changes during this period, mostly to the betterment of the ruling class. During each election, with no surprise to anyone, Diaz kept getting reelected. In 1910, as Diaz approached his 80th birthday, he had not put into place a plan for his succession. The 1910 elections were considered to be nothing but fraud, and it was used as a means to get Porfirio out of office. Violence broke out. Diaz was forced to resign and go into exile, and Mexico experienced a decade of civil war known as the Mexican Revolution. During military campaigns, men and sometimes women came from all over the country to do what they can for their side. Most people had never traveled more than a few miles until the army sent them hundreds of miles from home. By bringing all these folks together, sometimes diseases would break out. More soldiers die from illness than from bullets. This is also a good time for local stories to become national stories. While sitting around campfires waiting to either fight or to begin following orders to march, the soldiers would tell about what was being passed on in their hometowns, kind of comparing notes. One story is said to have originated in Puebla. In the lead up to the revolution, foreign businessmen flooded into Mexico to bilk the poor of what little they had. The ruling elites took a cut, so they didn't care if the poor were being made even poorer. Needing things like food and shelter, the poor folks would go to pawn shops. Banks only did business with people who had money. Some pawn shops were run by less than reputable men. They charged ridiculous rates, sometimes as much as 100%. The government didn't care as long as they got their cut. One pawn shop owner was named Horta Villa. He was described as being short, bald headed, round, and covered in coarse black hair, everywhere except his head. Not quite like Sasquatch, but he was a hairy little man. Business was good since the folks in Puebla needed money to live, and he was more than happy to lend them some at a very high rate of interest. To show off just how much money he was taking in, Horta had expensive rings that he put on each of his fingers. People mostly hated him, but they still had to do business with the man in order to buy the things they needed. It was common for people of Puebla to be heard saying, Que Deus te seca la mano, which means, please God, dry out his hand. In other words, make him not quite such a nasty person when it came to money. People would say this when walking past the pawn shop. Before the revolution began, Horta died. All his wealth couldn't keep the Grim Reaper away. No one attended his funeral except for his wife, who was seen standing alone by his grave. The last view of his body showed that his hands looked as if they had withered, they had shrunk. Those who heard this story said it was some kind of a revenge for all of the bad things he has done. Perhaps God had dried out his hands. After Horta was in the ground, the local newspaper ran a story telling about something seen in the cemetery in the middle of the night. A grave worker said he had seen a black, hairy hand with rings sticking up out of Horta's grave. Later, the story was added to by other grave workers. The hand was seen moving about from the grave as if looking for victims. Bodies began to be found, mostly with their eyes missing. The cause of death was strangulation. Bruises showed that the killer had used just one huge hand to do the deed. People said the hand wanted to tear out people's eyeballs and choke them to death because Horta had hated people when he was alive, and now his hands were out for revenge. When it was done killing, the hand would return to Horta's grave. After this story was published, there were many people who had encounters with disembodied hands that were covered with hair, moving around on their own. Some people said they were awoken from their sleep by a hand pulling them out of their beds. People began seeing the hand scuttling through fields and sneaking around in alleyways. Usually it was just one hand seen, sometimes outside a window or behind a doorway, under cabinets on occasion. The hands would run away using their fingers like legs. Soon it became the thing to tell kids that if they didn't behave, the hairy hand would get them. Other versions of the legend of the hand have similar wording. The hand is carved in carved. The hand is covered in black hair and it has sharp fingernails. Sometimes maggots, baby flies, are seen crawling all over the hand. The hand waits for children to get out of bed, and then it springs out from under the bed and pulls the child down into the underworld. In Colombia, the nails have poison tips. It is twice as big as the average adult hand. It is disembodied, and sometimes it leaves a trail of blood behind it. It also hides near large windows, behind doors that are left open, and inside of cabinets. To make matters worse, in a few legends, the hand can pass right through the wall. It just appears anywhere that it wants uh, to do bad things to those that don't behave. Kids are told to not sleep close to the wall so that the hand can't get them. A story was told by a woman who lived in Laredo, Texas, years ago. When she was 7 years old, her dad managed to buy a small plot of land in town. Her father and grandfather built a house so the family would have their own place. When I first got to Laredo back in 1988, there were still outhouses behind some buildings, and most of the streets were unpaved. Now, a lot of people find this hard to believe, but it's true. Laredo was known as the only large city in United States where more than 52% of all the streets were still just gravel or dirt. Most parking lots in the downtown area were just dirt. One day the city decided to change all this and they started paving and, well, the town changed quite a bit. Now, the family that was living in Laredo years ago had just a house. It didn't have indoor plumbing. So if you had to go to the bathroom, well, you had to go out in the backyard to that little building. And when it came time to take a shower, well, they had this other little building. It was just three walls and a roof, and it had a hose that ran over from a neighbor's house, so the family could get cleaned up. The door, well, that was just an opening with nothing to keep out prying eyes. Cold water was not a problem. In Laredo, instead of saying, I saved you some hot water, you say, hey, I saved you some cold water. The H stands for hot and the C stands for caliente, which means hot. You don't wait for the water to warm up before getting a shower. You wait for it to cool down. Now, you might think this is an exaggeration. Come to Laredo and have a look. You'll be amazed. One evening, the girls were heading out to the backyard to take showers. One would kind of guard the door while the other one did their thing, and then they would switch places. There was no place to hang a towel, so the girl waiting would hold it so that it didn't wind up laying on the ground. The girl in the shower was talking to her sister when she saw something in the yard. The girl outside turned to see what her sister was staring at. There was a hand that looked like it was sticking up out of the ground. She at first thought that maybe there was a body that had been buried there and somehow the dirt had been blown or washed away from this grave. Then she began to think that maybe somebody was just trying to play a prank on them. Somebody had stuck this plastic hand in the ground or something. The fingers began to move. It looked as if this hand was alive. Well, this definitely had to be some kind of a prank. The hand was big and covered with hair. The fingers were just kind of wiggling by themselves. The hand bent forward and landed on the ground, and it began to crawl towards the two girls. It was moving like a five-legged spider, using the fingers for legs. These two girls were frozen in fear. The hand suddenly began to race in their direction. This was enough to get the two girls moving. They both turned and ran for the house. The girl, who was still dressed, did manage to get the towel around her sister as they ran. Crashing through the door, they told their grandfather what they had just seen. Instead of laughing at the girls, he grabbed his shotgun and ran out into the yard. The grandfather searched the yard and looked over the fence, but he never could find the hand. They didn't call it La Mano Peluda. They called it La Mano Pachona, which also means hairy or furry hand. In Canada, there's a different kind of a hairy hand was seen. In North Battleford, Saskatchewan, a group of kids were in the living room of the house. One of the witnesses and his brother lived there, and all their friends were over visiting. They had their bedroom in the basement. As the kids were doing kid things, one of them noticed movement under the door to the basement. The light had been left on, and it was causing a shadow to appear in the space between the door and the floor. Something small was moving around on the other side of the door. Opening the door to see what kind of an animal was there, they found nothing. The next time something was seen through the crack, the witness gathered by the door and they looked under the opening. They could see a hairy hand about the size of a monkey's paw moving around on its own. No monkey, just the hand. The hand looked more human than animal, but still it was covered with hair. This bizarre sighting became somewhat of an ongoing thing. People would see something moving under the door. If they got down on the floor and looked, they would see one, sometimes two hands moving around on their own. If they opened the door, there would be nothing there. The hands had long fingernails that sometimes would make scratching sounds on the door or on the walls. Nobody ever actually got to see these hands when they opened the door, but they would see enough of them to know that there was something very weird going on. This went on for several years until the family just moved to another house. This next witness lived in a two-story house along with her parents, two older sisters, and three younger sisters. It was a Monday morning and it was time for school. The two older sisters would head out first so they could get to high school. The next two, the younger two, the witness and her younger sister, would leave a little while later en route to grade school. Middle school hadn't been invented yet. The two youngest weren't old enough to go to school yet. The eldest sister had her own room. The next in line shared a room with the girl that was telling the story, and then the three youngest girls all shared the last bedroom. The eldest, being the eldest, told the storyteller to go to her room, and fetch her jacket because it was a little chilly outside. Cats, you got to have them. So the youngest, the middle-aged girl went upstairs to her bedroom to get the eldest girl's jacket from her closet. This was an ongoing thing. Being the oldest daughter, well, she was kind of everybody's boss. That's Uncas, in case you didn't recognize her. Ah, opening the door, this young girl saw a hand come from under the bed on the floor, just up to about the wrist, and then it slipped back under the bedspread. She thought that one of the younger sisters was playing under the bed. Thinking that she was going to scare her, she crept over to the bed and ducked down, sticking her head under the space. There was no one there. She looked behind the bed, and there was nobody there either. There was no place to hide. She knows that she saw the hand, but it simply vanished. Suddenly, the room got very cold. All the hair on her arms stood up, and she bolted for the door, not wanting the hand to get her. She almost fell down the stairs trying to escape. The older sister thought that she was just being nuts or scared by nothing. As she went up, got her jacket, and there was nothing scary in the room. This was the first and only time this hand was ever seen in that room. Now, I believe this next story comes from Texas. It was some time ago since hearing it, and I've heard so many bizarre stories I have a hard time keeping their locations straight. The young daughter was told it was time for bed, and she didn't want to go to bed, but orders were orders. She went in, got ready, and jumped under the covers. Being a bit young, she slept with a nightlight that kept the monsters away. At least, that's what it was supposed to do. Her bed was close to one wall. She got a weird feeling there was something close to her head, and so she turned and looked. A hairy hand was sticking up between the mattress and the wall. It was reaching for her. The young girl let out with a terrified scream. Her father, hearing what sounded like someone being murdered, grabbed his pistol and charged up the stairs. Entering the room, he saw the black hairy hand right next to his daughter's head. He grabbed her and pulled her from the bed, then he aimed at the hand and fired. He shot the hand several times before it dropped out of view behind the mattress. The father got down on his knees and looked under the bed. There was nothing there. He pulled the bed away from the wall. Still nothing. Perplexed, he considered looking between the mattress and the box spring. There was a knock at the door. It was the police. Somebody had heard gunfire and called it in. The police believed none of his story. They asked the daughter, and she said the exact same thing. In the bedroom, they found 2 bullet holes in the wall by the bed, but there were 5 shell casings on the floor. This was way outside their pay grade, and so the officers called for a sergeant to come and make a decision. The sergeant asked what had been seen. He looked at the wall. He looked outside. The official story was to be an intruder had snuck in through the bedroom window, intent on some kind of nastiness. The father had fired his pistol, possibly hitting the perpetrator, who then escaped out the window, which was quickly opened to go along with the story. No charges would be filed since the man was protecting his home and his daughter. Now, I don't know what caliber the guy was using, but any size bullet would pass right through any hand. There should have been 5 bullet holes in the wall. There should have been some blood as well. The 3 missing rounds must have simply vanished along with the hand. Josh Turner, the guy that wrote the books that I recommended at the beginning of the show, on Paranormal Round Table, told about a creature found in Korea. It is a lot like Mano Peluda, only it has a body. If kids don't behave and do their parents tell them, this thing comes out from under their bed and attacks their feet. The description of the thing was it had brown, hairy hands, only has 4 digits. The body looks like a troll and it tries to bite people's feet. This is usually followed by screaming and parents coming in wanting to know what are their kids doing up past their bedtime. Mano Peluda is some kind of a story to keep kids in line until things happen that say there's more to this story than just words. We could be dealing with some kind of a tulpa, a thought form that is given enough energy in the form of fear to take on real substance. A lot of folks have seen similar things, and some have told their stories. Then again, when I did the show called Obscuros, I talked about some kind of a being or a race of beings that feed on fear. Now, what can possibly be more scary than a kid laying in bed thinking that there is something under the bed? Now, once in a while, somebody's going to be courageous and look under there to prove that there's nothing down there. So these creatures, the obscurers, perhaps they create something that looks like a black hairy hand so that the story can be carried on by others. Once you've seen something, it's hard to get it out of your head. So you're going to tell it to other people, and other people are going to thus believe in this thing under the bed. Whatever the thing is, I'm glad I'm old enough that nobody tells me when I've got to go to bed. Nobody ever tells me that Mano Peluda is going to get me if I don't behave. My wife has implied a few times, but she's never actually said. Hope you enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, tell your friends, tell your neighbors, Tell people you don't even know they should be listening to Strange Things with Chris James. And if you enjoy this kind of story, this kind of show, check out Josh Turner and Paranormal Roundtable. You'll probably enjoy his show as well. Don't stop listening to me just because you're listening to him, though. Come on, I need the audience. I don't like talking to myself. If you'd like to buy one of my books, go to Amazon.com, or you can pick them up at the Organic Man Coffee Trike here in Laredo. And if you'd like to get Josh Turner's books, you can find them at Amazon.com as well. Until next Saturday, this is Chris James and Baby Worm, Baby Fly.